Hello, welcome to my speech comparing racism in America to that seen in Europe. Now I'll start my speech now. News stories are leaked every day in the United States of America concerning police being called over black Americans doing nothing but merely being black. American racism is undoubtedly unique. Recently, in California, 3 black people, including a Jamaican, a Nigerian, and a native Londoner, were confronted by 7 police cars whilst checking out of their Airbnb as a white American was under the impression they were burglars. Even though the 3 individuals in question were not American, they still fell victim to racist American stereotypes. In other words, being confronted with tense, potentially life-threatening altercations with the police without having ever actually committed a crime. It's fair to say that America's racist status quo is unique and unbelievably oppressive. Their racism is completely based on complexion and rigidity. One's nationality is insignificant. There have been cases in France where people have been refused stamps due to being mistaken for Africans. Upon learning that they were in fact American, they apologised and proceeded to sell the stamps. This level of racism in France is of course unacceptable, but is no comparison to that seen in America. During the week of the London riots in 2011, Londoners openly spoke about how black people could be treated differently by law enforcement. Yet, conversations focused on analysing the police's techniques, seeing how they could keep teenagers away from the streets during the summer months, as well as how to catch looters on CCTV. In American speech, criminality of black bodies would have justified the police killing of Mark Duggan, who was shot dead in the aforementioned riots, and used them as an inevitable byproduct of a so-called cultural crime. Michael Brown's murder and the riots in Ferguson met this scene before American script. Racism towards black people in America generally has nothing to do with immigration or nationality. There is no home country for African Americans to connect to. Instead, it is pretty much a status quo of home alienation, dehumanisation, criminalisation, and terror. Racism in Europe is bad, but nowhere near on the same level as that seen in America. The systemic racism in America starts with slavery and the multiple slave codes, state or federal laws created which codified the inhumane practice of slavery into law. The South of America was a slave society, not just a society with slaves, although following the abolition of slavery, laws reminiscent of slave codes went on to oppress black people. After the Civil War, these black codes had the sole purpose of depriving recently freed black Americans of any rights they had just gained. Black codes varied from state to state, yet the legal foundation focused on laws which allowed for an African American to be arrested if they were unemployed or homeless. The laws applied to countless amounts of blacks due to accommodation and chance of employment for liberated blacks in the south of the country were as good as non-existent post-war. Advocates for Virginia's Vagrancy Act of 1866 claimed that it would reinstate slavery in all but its name. The whites of the South would report the blacks' vagrancy. Law enforcement would then arrest them and sentence African Americans for up to 3 months of forced labour on public or private lands. The federal government fought against black codes during Reconstruction by voting previous abolitionists and freed blacks to public office by creating laws and adding amendments to the American Constitution to protect black American rights. After the Reconstruction collapse in 1877, 7 states brought them back. Black codes became the heart of state constitutions, poll taxes and literacy exams. Preventing African Americans from voting became the norm. Jim Crow and racial segregation, which governed the south of the country until the 60s, are prolongations of these laws. As black families began to flee this part of the country in the 20th century throughout the Great Migration, they were followed by the Black Code to Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, amongst other places. Black Americans, home refugees, fleeing state-funded terrorism, which is rumoured to bring crime, unemployment, vagrancy and drugs. American police department's answer was additional black codes and aggressive policing towards black communities. Black lives have always been criminalised and dehumanised in the US. Throughout Obama's presidency, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, and numerous other unnamed African Americans were murdered by the police. But with a black president in power, many Americans saw the light at the end of the tunnel. Social media brought to light these injustices, transforming the Black Lives Matters movement. Under Donald Trump, we have experienced the same amount of violence, which America has always seen as now, at best, they have an indifferent federal government with a racist president. Because of this change, more white Americans are encouraged to reinstate black codes. With Obama, social media championed the people's desire for progress. Now it highlights our clear decline. Just last week, in New York City, a black lawyer and a 19-year-old daughter were handcuffed and arrested by police after being wrongly accused of shoplifting. In another incident, the police were summoned by a white student at Yale University due to a black Yale student sleeping in the common area in their dormitory. In April of last year, a white woman called the police on an African American family for having a barbecue in a public park. After the arrest of two black men for sitting in a Starbucks, along with increased awareness of similar injustices, the world is now able to clearly see how racist the law that black people constantly face in the US is. Their arrest was down the Black Code of 2018, about the 3 months of forced labour. Trump, in power, has only aggravated the problem with social media raising awareness, yet using black codes and posing oppression against black people as democratic justice and fair laws enforcement has unfortunately always been the US status quo. Thank you very much for your time.